The hiss of spray cans at 6 a.m. wasn't my usual wake-up call. But what really yanked me out of bed was Karen's voice, our neighborhood's self-proclaimed sheriff, cackling like she'd just cracked a cold case. I peered out my window and froze. There she was, in a floral robe and flip-flops, gleefully tagging my parked truck with neon pink paint, scrawling junk across the side like a graffiti artist gone rogue. Here's the kicker. That wasn't some rusty clunker rotting in my driveway. It was a fully operational bomb squad vehicle, disguised for civilian use, and Karen, in all her TikTok streaming glory to her 3,000 followers, had just vandalized federal property. I stepped outside just as she dotted the exclamation point on trash, grinning like a raccoon who'd raided a buffet. When she spotted me, her face didn't show a hint of shame, just pure, smug triumph. "I'm doing the neighborhood a favor," she declared, claiming my truck was an eyesore and a health hazard. She even waved her spray can at me like it was a mic drop, crowing. Some of us care about property values. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I just smiled and said, "Karen, you just defaced a federally commissioned EOD unit." Her smirk vanished faster than a spark in a dynamite factory. She blinked, scoffed, then blinked again, the reality sinking in. I'm no stranger to Karen's nonsense. She once tried to fine a family for their kid's sidewalk chalk and filed a noise complaint over a wind chime's offensive pitch. But this wasn't just her usual meddling. This was a criminal masterpiece. That truck she tagged wasn't just my ride. I'm a civilian contractor for federal agencies, and she'd just crossed a line that'd blow up her world. Which city of the United States are you watching from? Drop a comment and share with us if you have any confrontation with an HOA. We will narrate your story on our channel. Specifically, with bomb disposal and hazardous material unit, the truck had undergone camouflage rework to blend in, but it still had its telltale armored reinforcements, Militara tires, and a discreet ID plate under the bumper, nothing Karen would have recognized. Of course, she doesn't recognize much beyond her own reflection and the HOA handbook after she marched off with her phone still recording and a suspicious smirk that screamed, "I just saved the community." I calmly walked back inside, sat at my desk and queued up the footage from my home surveillance system. Every moment was crystal clear. Her muttered insults, her sloppy spray can flourishes, her final flourish when she proudly posed in front of the truck like she just tagged a graffiti wall in some rebel art show. What I hadn't noticed until then, though, was something that made my stomach twist in the final frame of the video. Karen leaned down and taped something to the back hatch of the truck. At first glance it looked like a Bluetooth speaker wrapped in tinfoil and duct tape, probably another one of her misguided pranks or some ridiculous deterrent she thought would make a statement. But the problem was, when you work with Yodi vehicles, anything wrapped in foil that wasn't there before raises a red flag higher than a parade. I walked back out to the truck cautiously. The truck's internal AI system had already alerted me to an unknown object affixed to the rear. Its onboard diagnostics had taken a snapshot, flagged it, and sent the alert to our base server in Washington. I didn't even have time to touch it before my phone rang. My handler, calm, direct, and not remotely amused, I was told to secure the area and remain on standby while a response team verified the object. I wasn't worried about a real explosion, but Karen had, unknowingly, just triggered a chain reaction that would be bigger than any fireball by the time the agency reps arrived. Karen was back in her garden, watering her petunias like nothing had happened. Her Bluetooth speaker, duct-taped to the truck, was in fact just that, a speaker playing ambient whale noises. Why, no one knows. She claimed it was to cleanse the space of negative energy. You can't make this stuff up, but even if it wasn't dangerous, the fact she planted an unknown device on a bomb squad vehicle was enough to warrant serious questions. Her live stream was already making the rounds. Federal systems flagged the footage. The license plate was visible. So were certain identifiers. That shouldn't have been shown online. Karen, in all her self-righteous glory, had turned my quiet suburban block into a minor national security incident while the agents conducted their sweep. HOA's local enforcer showed up in a golf cart like he was about to issue parking tickets at the Super Bowl. He took one look at the truck and had the nerve to hand me a citation for violating visual standard. According to HOA policy, my vehicle wasn't properly aesthetically compatible with the community. I asked him if the policy manual said anything about national defense. He told me not to get smart. I told him this was a live federal investigation. He told me to take it up with Karen. That's when I knew I wasn't just dealing with one overbearing neighbor. I was going up against a whole system that believed its made-up rules outweighed federal jurisdiction to keep things calm. I gave the agents everything they needed: footage, truck specs, the alert logs, and timestamp. Karen, meanwhile, remained as clueless as ever. She strutted around like she was the star of some suburban soap opera, thinking she'd won. She had no idea. The story was just getting started, and she was the antagonist about to get written out. Her TikTok video, though, that was her undoing. Not only had she posted herself committing vandalism, she bragged about it and mocked the vehicle's armor. That meant she was spreading visuals of classified modifications. The irony was rich. She'd always been the one calling the cops on teenagers for jaywalking or teens with loud music, but now she had unknowingly committed a federal offense on camera and broadcast it for the world to see. It wasn't just petty anymore, it was personal. She didn't just insult my property. She compromised a tool designed to save lives, and worst of all, she did it with a smug smile and a can of neon pink. That night, as the agents packed up and left, one of them handed me a warning slip, not for me, but for Karen, an official statement requesting she not tamper with the vehicle again, and that further contact with it would be treated as obstruction of federal operations. I knew she'd ignore it. Karen doesn't follow rules. She writes her own and expects everyone else to kneel. But this wasn't just HOA playground politics anymore. She had opened a door that couldn't be shut quietly. I sat on the front porch with a cold drink in hand, watching the truck system do a final scan. The word junk was still visible under the moonlight, slightly smudged from the inspection. I didn't clean it off, not yet. That graffiti was going to be the beginning of the end for Karen's reign. The corrupt HOA backing her and everything she thought she controlled. She thought she defaced an old truck. What she actually did was light the fuse, and tomorrow, the blast would begin. Karen must have thought that her little stunt would earn her a medal from the HOA, maybe even land her a celebratory feature in their dusty newsletter. But instead, suits, dark sunglasses, and federal badges. I had given my report to the proper agency channels the moment the duct tape speaker was identified. Even if the item itself wasn't explosive, the mere act of affixing something to a government-operated vehicle, especially one flagged in the Federal Registry, triggered an automatic review. Karen didn't understand what that meant, of course, she thought. Federal property was something you only found behind barbed wire fences and high walls. Not something that could be quietly parked next door to her Bionis. Her face, when she opened the door, was pure. Suburban panic slippers on rollers still in her. Hair and confusion dripping off her like the hose she forgot to shut off. The agents were polite but firm. They didn't cuff her or drag her out. They simply asked if she had recently uploaded or deleted any videos online involving a military type vehicle. Karen stammered, then tried to blame a neighbor's prank and called it a harmless joke. One of the agents raised an eyebrow and asked, "Is that why you taped a device to it and spray painted it while laughing on camera?" Karen froze. That's when it hit her. This wasn't going to be just another slap on the wrist. She was escorted back inside her home for further questioning, while one agent remained outside, now reviewing the footage I'd provided. They didn't arrest her that day, but they did seize her phone and laptop. Standard procedure in cases of potential tampering with classified or sensitive asset. Word SPD through the neighborhood like wildfire, and as usual, people took sides. Some neighbors were horrified that Karen had drawn federal attention to our quiet street. Others assumed I had overreacted and accused me of bringing in too much drama. But a surprising number of residents, especially those who'd been on the receiving end of Karen's past HOA tantrums, began whispering things like "finally" and "maybe she'll back off now." I kept quiet, letting the process unfold. But then, just when it seemed like the dust was settling, the HLA decided to pour gasoline on the fire. A formal letter arrived at my mailbox the very next day, delivered not by the post office, but by Gary, the HAS favorite errand boy, who made sure to wear his laminated badge like it actually meant something. The letter was signed Karen's brother-in-law. It stated that the presence of military-grade equipment on residential property violated Article 7B of the Community Safety and Visual Harmony Agreement. I had to reread that twice. Visual harmony, that's what they were calling it. I was being penalized for protecting federal equipment from vandalism, while Karen, the vandal, was still technically on their good side. I contacted my federal handler immediately and forwarded the letter. He laughed, actually laughed, then told me to let them proceed. He said, "They have no idea what they're getting into." It turns out there's a little-known clause in state housing law that forbids private or vehicles, especially those linked to national security infrastructure. My handler told me to document every HOA communication moving forward because it could quickly turn into a textbook case of obstruction. Still, I wanted to play it cool, so I did what I always do when things get too absurd to reason with. I kept receipt. Every email, every voicemail, every so-called neighborhood survey they sent around with rigged language like, "Do you support the removal of aggressive-looking machinery from our peaceful street?" I saved it all, and in the meantime, something unexpected happened. Neighborhood kids started showing more and more interest in the truck. They'd cautiously bike by and glance at it, until one day I invited a group of them over and gave a small, kid-friendly talk about what bomb disposal meant and why the truck looked the way it did. I showed them how the wheels could withstand shrapnel and how the compartments housed robotics and scanning equipment. I never revealed anything classified, of course, but I gave just enough detail to make it clear this was no ordinary vehicle. That moment, seeing kids Fascinated instead of afraid was one of the most rewarding outcomes so far. The parents, too, started realizing maybe Karen's paranoia wasn't shared by everyone, but Karen herself wasn't done while her digital devices remained under federal review. About how she was being targeted by government shills, and how the truck was part of an intimidation campaign, she claimed. She was the real victim, that she had been baited into vandalizing the truck. She even alleged that the Bluetooth speaker was planted by me as a setup. The woman had gone full conspiracy mode. Most people unfollowed or rolled their eyes, but a few of her loyal within the neighborhood, they scheduled a meeting, not a quiet one, but a full-blown town hall-style event in the community center. I was formally invited to attend and answer for my property's impact on neighborhood peace. It would have been laughable if it weren't so incredibly illegal, but I said yes, not because I owed them anything, but because I had a plan. I contacted my agency handler and let him know exactly what the HOA was up to. He asked if I said yes, just not in uniform. Let them think it's still just me. Let them underestimate me one more time. The night before the meeting, I received a strange message slipped under my door. No envelope, no signature, just a folded page that read, "She's not done." I knew instantly who it referred to. Karen never went down without swinging, and sure enough, later that night, my motion detector picked up movement near the truck. Again, this time, she didn't spray paint it. She stood in front of it, stared at it for over 5 minutes, then whispered something to her phone camera. Before walking away, I watched it in real time, chilled by her determination, preparing her next move. What she didn't know was that the federal review of her devices had already uncovered something much bigger than vandalism. Embedded in one of her deleted TikToks was footage she thought was harmless, a short pan of her husband's office where stacks of HOA documents were visible in the background, among them a ledger, unbeknownst to HOA maintenance funds to pay for private renovations on their home, deck upgrades, security cameras, and even a luxury hot tub listed as a community safety enhancement. That one video had opened the door to a much larger investigation. So while Karen prepped her speech for the meeting about how my truck was terrorizing her hydrangeas, the federal team was prepping a very different set of questions for her household, and I was prepping my own bombshell, the full surveillance. Calmly, methodically, and publicly, Karen had made the mistake of tagging my truck with spray paint and calling it junk. But now she was about to find out what happens when you deface something you don't understand, try to silence someone who plays by a much bigger rulebook, and declare war on the wrong neighbor. Tomorrow's meeting wouldn't just be a showdown. It would be the turning point, not just for me, but for the entire neighborhood. The community center was buzzing louder than a hornet's nest kicked by a lawnmower. Karen had summoned every HOA loyalist she could, wrangle mostly the usual suspects who complained about mailbox paint shades and unsanctioned porch wind chimes, confront dangerous neighborhood disturbances, and while it wasn't printed outright, everyone knew it was about me and the truck. I arrived 5 minutes early, but the parking lot was already swamped with people, some curious, some tense, and a few clearly there for the drama. What they didn't know was that I wasn't walking in alone. A man in his 40s, business casual clean cut, walked beside me to the crowd. He looked like just another neighbor. In reality, he was a federal investigator from DHS tasked with observing the proceedings under my official cooperation agreement. The agency had cleared it. I wasn't breaking any protocol, but took our seats near the back as Karen stood at the front of the room, sipping water like a smug pageant queen ready to launch into her big speech. The HOA president, Harold, called the meeting to order with exaggerated formality, pretending this was some high-level congressional briefing. He introduced Karen as a concerned resident and longtime champion of community values, recounting her version of events, though version would be putting it generously. She framed it as a community rescue mission, describing my truck as an unsightly, terrifying eyesore that had been abandoned and left to rot. She spun her spray painting as a visual protest, a wake-up call to protect their property values. Her words were coated in faux concern, but laced with venom. She talked the more she sank herself, she claimed. She didn't know what the vehicle was, but also insisted she had suspected it was being used to store explosive. She said she feared for her family's safety, yet posted a public TikTok joking about it. She even referred to the speaker she attached to the truck as performance art that drew a few confused looks from the crowd. Finally, as if reaching her dramatic peak, she said the community had a duty to stand against unauthorized threats and proposed a motion for the HOA to demand the vehicle's removal within 48 hours. That's when I stood up. I didn't need a mic, I just spoke. Clearly, I thanked everyone for coming and for listening to all perspectives. Then I said I'd like to respond with a short video. Harold immediately protested, claiming that videos weren't part of the scheduled format. But the Federal Observer, sitting beside me, raised his hand and calmly said, as a representative of a federal agency, "I'd like to recommend we make an exception." The room went dead quiet. Harold pulled Karen, turned around slowly, her lips parted as if the words had stuck somewhere between her throat and ego. Dimmed, and the footage began. The video started with Karen in her bathrobe, holding a can of neon paint, confidently spraying junk and trash across my truck's armored paneling. Her voice was unmistakable. She laughed, posed for her phone, and added the Bluetooth speaker to the back hatch. Her commentary was filled with mocking tone and fake heroic. Then the footage cut to a timestamp view from the truck's onboard AI surveillance, showing the object being detected, tagged, and reported. The federal alert logs flashed on screen. I paused it there and said the vehicle Karen vandalized is an active EOD unit used in federal bomb disposal effort. It's registered with DHS and used in disaster response drills across the state. It is not a toy, it is not abandoned, and it is absolutely not subject to HOA aesthetic regulations. You could hear a pin drop. I continued explaining that, while Karen believed she was correcting a neighborhood nuisance, she had, in fact, tampered with federal property, triggered a soft security review, and interfered with a critical emergency vehicle. The agent beside me nodded and added that the Department of Homeland Security was still evaluating the legal implications of her actions. Karen muttered something about it being a misunderstanding, but I wasn't done. I added that what the investigation uncovered during this process was even more troubling: an internal audit of HOA finances that had begun once federal investigators examined her husband's involvement in certain fund allocations. That's when the second video began playing. It was a screen recording from Karen's TikTok archives where she'd unknowingly filmed a portion of her husband's office while complaining about neighborhood freeloaders. In the background, clearly visible, was a ledger marked HOA expense records, with a few entries circled in red: renovation projects listed as public upgrades, but invoices tracked back to their personal bank. account: a brand new outdoor kitchen, an above-ground pool, luxury fencing for a community safety perimeter, all paid for with HOA reserve funds. Audible gasps spread through the room. A few neighbors stood up, whispering to one another. One woman walked straight out the door. Karen's face had gone completely still. I calmly said that a formal investigation was already underway and subpoenas had been issued for financial records. Karen, at this point, blurted out, "This is a setup. He's trying to destroy my family." But her voice cracked, and for the first time her posture wavered. I didn't respond to the accusation. I just turned to Harold and said, "You still want me to move the truck?" Harold didn't answer. His lips moved, but no words came. The Federal Observer leaned forward and gently placed a hand on my shoulder, signaling I'd done enough. He stood and addressed the room directly. He explained the vehicle's legal exemption, the danger of interfering with federal operations, and the seriousness of the financial red flags discovered during the process. He reassured the residents that no one was under criminal indictment yet, but that the wheels of accountability had begun turning. The meeting was adjourned in stunned silence as people filed out. A few neighbors approached me, not with suspicion, but with quiet thanks. One man said, "I didn't even know half of what was going on until tonight." Another whispered, "She's been running this place like a dictatorship for years." That night, Karen didn't go home through the front door. She slipped out the back, wrapped in a hoodie, escorted by Harold, who looked like he'd aged 10 years in 1 hour. The mighty HOA Crusaders had been stripped down to 2 very nervous residents, who finally realized they weren't untouchable. I got home and parked the truck exactly where it had been all along. The pink graffiti still marked one panel, a little faded now but very much visible. I left it there. It had become a symbol of ignorance, of arrogance, and of exactly what happens when you underestimate the wrong person. I poured a drink, sat on my porch, and watched as Harold's luxury SUV pulled away from Karen's driveway without headlights, like a thief leaving a scene of their own crime. I didn't smile, not yet, because this wasn't over. The fallout had just begun. HO bylaws would be reviewed, emergency elections were being discussed, and the federal subpoenas were already circling like vultures over the rotting carcass of Karen's reign. She had tried to paint over a truck. She didn't understand in doing so. She revealed the corruption, the lies, and the false authority she had hidden behind for years. And while her story was going viral for all the wrong reasons, mine was just getting warmed up. The morning after the HOA meeting felt oddly calm, like the eerie silence just before a storm slams into the coast. Karen's house, which had once been the loudest and most chaotic in the neighborhood, music blaring, sprinklers misted, and her voice always somewhere in the background, barking commands, was quiet. No front door activity, no porch snooping, and not even her dog was let out. It was the kind of silence that didn't mean peace, it meant regrouping and sure enough. By mid-afternoon, her retaliation took form, not with noise or graffiti, but with a carefully crafted narrative, blasted across every digital platform she could still access, despite having her main devices temporarily confiscated by federal investigators. Karen found her way back online using an old iPad and a friend's login. Her first post was a long-winded Facebook screed titled "The Truth Behind the Government Setup." In it, she claimed she had been tricked into vandalizing a fake government vehicle as part of a neighbor's revenge plot. She framed herself as a whistleblower and added a fabricated story about how I had once threatened to unleash federal consequences if she didn't support my backyard bunker renovations. It would have been funny if she hadn't tagged 5 local news stations and a community safety watchdog group. She even added hashtags like #neighborhood-hostage and #HOA corruption cover-up, completely oblivious to the irony that she and her family were the ones under active investigation. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The federal agency assigned to my case had already seen the posts and once again made note of her attempts to spin misinformation during an active investigation. But what Karen didn't realize was that her digital flailing was only making things worse. Every time she posted a lie, someone in the neighborhood countered it with fact. A neighbor uploaded footage of her bragging about the spray paint incident. Another shared the financial discrepancies being unearthed from HOA meeting record. Slowly, her fortress of lies started to crumble, not from an external assault, but from within her own community. Still, Karen wasn't ready to surrender. Her next move came 3 days later, when a group of her closest HOA allies showed up at my doorstep with clipboards and what they called a neighborhood petition. Their goal was to force a special meeting to vote on an emergency bylaw change that would give the HLA power to remove any vehicle deemed hostile, threatening, or unsightly. By majority vote, it was a ridiculous overreach and borderline illegal, especially considering state laws that prohibit HOAs from interfering with federally protected property. But the sight of them marching down my driveway like some beige-sweatered militia was too much. I met them on the porch, arms crossed, and asked calmly if they'd like some lemonade. While I called my DHS contact on speaker, that was all it took. They froze, exchanged awkward glances, and backed away. Without another word, that evening, Karen staged a dramatic live stream in her backyard. She set up a plastic podium, wore oversized sunglasses, and delivered a rambling monologue about how she was being silenced, watched, and unfairly targeted by government agents disguised as neighbors. She claimed her freedom was being trampled by shadowy authorities, and that her mission was to protect the children of the community from hidden threats. She wept on camera, clutched a flag, and even quoted the Constitution badly. Her performance was shared by a few conspiracy pages, but the majority of the viewers were locals who had now fully lost their patience. The next morning, Karen's mailbox was stuffed with notes that read things like "Stop embarrassing the neighborhood" and "Resign already." One was just a picture of her own spray-painted truck, captioned with the words, "Poetic Justice." Meanwhile, the investigation into the HOA's financial corruption accelerated. A federal review team had been dispatched to audit the association's records, and what they found was worse than anyone imagined. Karen's husband had not only redirected HOA funds into private renovations, but he'd also created fake vendor invoices for maintenance work that never happened. Payments had been issued to a shell landscaping company that didn't exist. The kicker: one of the checks was made out to himself under a middle name. When confronted, he claimed it was a mistake, but with every layer pulled back, the evidence of deliberate embezzlement became more obvious. The federal agents began preparing their case for formal charges, and the neighborhood buzzed with shock and anger. I stayed focused. My job was never to gloat or provoke. It was to protect the integrity of the equipment I was responsible for, and let the truth do the heavy lifting. But I did allow myself one moment of petty satisfaction when a local journalist contacted me for an interview. She had followed the Facebook drama Verified the federal involvement and wanted to write a profile piece titled "The Truck That Exposed an HOA Empire." I politely declined to appear in person, but agreed to provide background information anonymously. The article ran 2 days later, complete with photos of the pink-sprayed truck, DHS confirmation of its purpose, and verified statements about the pending HOA investigation. Karen's name was redacted, but everyone knew that same day Karen attempted one final power play. She contacted a private towing company, an out-of-town contractor with no knowledge of the federal exemptions, and tried to have my truck removed under false pretenses. They arrived in the early evening with a flatbed and flashing lights, looking confused but ready. What they didn't expect was for 2 federal agents to arrive less than 5 minutes later. One flash of a badge, and the tow truck backed off immediately. The driver apologized and left Karen standing at the end of her driveway watching it all unfold. Finally realized she had crossed a line she couldn't undo, a line painted not in neon pink but in federal ink. By the time the sun set, Karen's front lawn was empty. No garden flags, no plastic decorations, not even her usual flamingo lawn ornament. It was the quietest it had ever been inside. She was likely preparing for what came next. Subpoenas, depositions, and the unraveling of every bit of fake authority she had ever wielded. The HOA had called for an emergency board vote to remove Harold as president, and with him gone, Karen's support system evaporated that night. I took a stroll around the block. It was a peaceful evening, a slight breeze brushing through the trees. I noticed several neighbors outside, some watering lawns, some chatting in driveways. Many of them smiled and nodded as I passed, something that hadn't happened in months. One couple even offered me a beer. We sat on their porch, talking about how weird things had gotten, how quickly the Karen kingdom had started falling apart. One neighbor said, honestly, "I thought you were the problem at first, but now I think you saved this whole place." I didn't agree or disagree. I just sipped my drink and looked toward the cul-de-sac where Karen's house sat, dark, her lights off, and her world unraveling. It wasn't over yet, not completely. The formal charges hadn't been announced, the trials hadn't begun, and the HOA still had plenty of rebuilding to do. But something had changed for the first time in years. The neighborhood felt like it belonged to its residents again, not to one loud woman with a clipboard and a superiority complex. And that truck still parked right where it had always been, pink paint, faded but very much visible, a reminder of what had been done and what had finally been undone. The week after Karen's attempted to stunt, the neighborhood began shifting in ways that felt almost surreal. Where once people had avoided eye contact and whispered from porches, now they waved, spoke openly, and even joked about the past few weeks like survivors of some petty suburban war. There was a lightness in the air, not because the drama was over, but because the grip Karen once had on everything from fence paint to porch swing angles had finally cracked beyond repair. People were reclaiming their lawns, their voices, and most importantly, their sanity. And while the cleanup wasn't quick or quiet, it was undeniably underway. Karen, meanwhile, became a ghost of her former self. Her daily routines vanished. No more sunrise walks around the block, no more angry letters taped to mailboxes. Her garage door stayed shut. Her car remained unmoved. Even her trademark megaphone, which she once used to lead neighborhood awareness marches, was conspicuously absent. Rumors swirled. Some said she was preparing to sue the federal government for emotional damage. Others said she was trying to cut a deal for her husband's charges by offering to cooperate. The truth, as I came to find out later, was more desperate and far less clever. Karen had been advised by her lawyer to stay absolutely silent and off all platforms until further notice, especially after she'd been caught violating the preliminary gag order by using a friend's Instagram to repost conspiracy memes. The judge had not been amused. Her husband Harold hadn't fared much better after being ousted in a unanimous Donges HOA board vote. He was hit with an official cease and desist from the newly appointed interim president. The records uncovered during the audit had not only proven fraud but also a direct conflict of interest in awarding contracts to himself under aliases. As a result, all HOA bank accounts were frozen pending the outcome of the investigation, and the neighborhood landscaping project that had been underway ground to a halt. People were furious, not at me, but at the years of unchecked control they'd allowed to go on under Karen's faux authority. One neighbor, a soft-spoken woman named Maggie, said it best when she told me we gave them power because they scared us into thinking we needed them. Turns out, we just needed boundaries around this time. I got a call from my handler. He was brief and efficient as always, but this time his voice had a rare edge of satisfaction. The Department of Justice had officially filed charges against Karen's husband for wire fraud, embezzlement, and misuse of community funds under the Homeowners Fraud Prevention Act. Karen herself had been named as a secondary party in the obstruction of justice component, primarily for her repeated tampering with evidence, her social media misinformation campaign, and the false police reports she had filed about me and others in the neighborhood. They were given a court date. It was no longer speculation. It was real, and it was going public the day the charges were made. Official news vans actually rolled through the cul-de-sac. Reporters snapped photos of Karen's now quiet home, and one even tried to interview me. I declined, still bound by federal discretion, but I did watch from my living room as Karen peeked through her blinds and quickly ducked out of view. That evening, I parked the bomb squad truck a little more prominently in my driveway, facing the street, not as a threat but as a statement. The graffiti was still visible, though fading, just the word junk, barely legible. Now I had grown used to it. It reminded me that sometimes even the ugliest moments leave behind something useful, a warning, a badge of resilience. But the real full-circle moment came a few days later, when the interim HOA president invited me to the next community meeting, not to reprimand, question, or target me, but to recognize the turning point the neighborhood had experienced. Because of what happened, I hesitated at first. I'm not one for awards or applause, especially not for just doing what's right. But something told me this wasn't about recognition, it was about closure. I attended quietly, sitting in the middle row, while neighbors filled in around me. This time, the mood was light, almost festive. The interim board had already begun revising the bylaws to prevent abuse of power and limit unilateral decisions. They had introduced transparency rules, mandatory vote records, and a public fund tracking system. At the start of the meeting, the president thanked me for my composure, professionalism, and unwavering calm in the face of outrageous provocation. A few chuckled at the last part. I simply nodded and said I was happy to see everyone getting involved again. That was all. No big speech, no dramatic retelling, just a moment of unity in a room that had once been Karen's stage. Later that night, I walked home under a calm sky and passed by Karen's house. The lights were still out in the front, the blinds still drawn her once pristine lawn. Now had weeds sprouting along the edges. The paint on her garden gnome was chipped. The mailbox, once plastered with motivational HOA slogans, now sat empty and rusting. I paused only for a moment, not out of spite, but because I realized something strange. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered how she smirked that morning she vandalized the truck, how she laughed as she taped that speaker to the hatch, how she thought she was invincible behind her title and her brother-in-law's shield. That's when I knew she hadn't lost everything because someone destroyed her. She'd lost everything because she built it, all on lies, intimidation, and spray paint. A week later, something unexpected arrived at my door, a large cardboard box with no return address. Inside was a custom-made magnetic decal for my truck, sent anonymously. It read, "Not junk, justice." It was simple, funny, and surprisingly well-designed. I smiled, slapped it on the side of the vehicle right over the fading neon letters, and took a step back. The truck had become a legend around the neighborhood. Kids asked to take photos with it. One elderly couple joked that it had done more for neighborhood safety than the entire HOA in 5 years. And while I never sought celebrity, I didn't mind the new role: quiet guardian of the block, the guy who kept his head down until it was time to rise. Karen eventually moved out. She didn't tell anyone. One day, her house just sat dark for too long, and the next week, a for sale sign went up. Word had it she accepted a plea deal in exchange for testifying about her husband's role in the fraud. The house was bought by a retired firefighter and his wife, who, as fate would have it, found the entire saga hilarious and kept the pink lawn flamingo they found in the backyard as a souvenir. They named it Karen. Months past, life returned to normal. The truck still sat in my driveway, still active, still federally registered, but it was no longer a point of contention. It was a symbol of something deeper. What happens when regular people decide they're done being bullied? The HOA was now run by an elected board with rotating members, transparency, and monthly open forum night. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it was better and better after all that. Felt like a miracle. I didn't seek revenge. I didn't destroy Karen. I simply told the truth, stood my ground, and let the systems meant to protect people do their job. She mistook silence for weakness, laws for suggestions, and a federal vehicle for scrap metal. In the end, that's what brought her down. Not me, not even the truck, but her own refusal to understand the weight of her actions. As I sat on my porch one evening, watching the sun dip low behind the trees, I realized something profound. You don't always need to fight fire with fire. Sometimes all it takes is parking the right truck in the wrong woman's path and letting karma shift into